When you think about the construction industry, what pops into your head? You're probably picturing hard hats, heavy machinery, a lot of intense physical work, right? And that picture, well, it leads most of us to a pretty simple assumption that for someone with a spinal cord injury, a career in that field is just impossible. But what if that whole idea is just plain wrong? Today, we are digging into a really fascinating study that turns that entire assumption on its head. So, this is the big question. For years, the conventional wisdom has just been a big fat yes. I mean, the physical demands seem like they'd be an insurmountable barrier. And that belief is so deeply ingrained, it often goes totally unchallenged, not just by employers, but even by individuals with disabilities themselves. And the researchers who looked into this, they called it exactly that, a myth. This quote from the 2023 study this whole explainer is based on, it just sets the stage perfectly. They saw this powerful, widely held belief that really wasn't backed up by any hard data. So they decided to go find some. So back in 2021, a team in Guadalajara, Mexico, took a really direct approach. Instead of just speculating, they went straight to the source. They talked to 52 construction employers and 44 individuals with spinal cord injuries to get the real story from both sides of the hiring desk. Okay, let's get into it, starting with what the employers had to say. And what they found right off the bat starts to just tear that whole industry myth apart. The results were, well, let's just say they were not what you'd expect. Get this, 100%. Seriously, let that sink in for a second. Every single one of the 52 employers they talked to said they would be willing to hire a person with a disability. Not some of them, not most of them, all of them. That right there is the first huge crack in the myth. And it goes way beyond just being willing. A huge majority, we're talking 85%, actually believed that hiring an employee with a spinal cord injury would be a positive thing for their company. They saw it as an asset, not a liability. Okay, but talk is cheap, right? What about actual commitment? Well, here it is. 81% of these employers were ready to put their money where their mouth is. They said they would invest in the equipment needed to make their work sites accessible. That shows a real, practical desire for inclusion. And this commitment, it runs deep. I mean, just look at this table. 100% would invest in training for office work. 82% would invest in training for work on the actual site. And get this, an incredible 98% could see a person with a spinal cord injury working under their supervision. It's just, wow. The feeling here is overwhelmingly proactive and positive. So we've got this really clear picture, right? Employers are open, they're willing to invest, but that's only half the story. Now we need to look at what we'll call the perception gap, the difference between all that optimism and the perspective of those with lived experience. And this, right here, this is where things get really interesting. While a massive 90% of employers say, yes, there's a place for people with disabilities here, only 55% of individuals with spinal cord injuries feel like those opportunities actually exist for them. That gap isn't about employers being negative. It really speaks to the real-world barriers and the skepticism that comes from experience. But here's the wild part. Even with that gap and how optimistic everyone felt, when the researchers started asking about the specifics, the nitty-gritty, well, something pretty amazing happened. The two groups started to line up in some really remarkable ways. It's pretty incredible, actually. Both groups, totally on their own, pointed to the exact same jobs as being a perfect fit. Administration, design, procurement, marketing, these are all skilled, essential positions where your talent and your brain are what really matter. There's this shared, practical understanding of where people can step in and just excel. And look, this also shows that everyone was being really realistic here. They also agreed on which jobs would be, a lot tougher physically, things like being a site supervisor or lab expert. This isn't about closing doors. It's about a realistic, common-sense approach to finding the right fit from everyone involved. So let's recap. We have this common ground. We've got employers who are eager to hire, and we have this clear, shared understanding from both groups about which jobs are a fantastic fit. The willingness is there. The practical path forward seems clear. And that leads us to the real kicker, the million-dollar question. If the companies aren't the problem and everyone agrees on the jobs, then what is actually stopping people from getting hired? Well, the answer pulls the camera way back from the workplace itself. Because the answer, it turns out, has almost nothing to do with the actual job site. Researchers asked a simple question, can you get to work? And the responses were just staggering.
82% said the city itself isn't adapted for their commute. And even higher, 86% said public transport isn't equipped to help them. The biggest hurdle isn't getting the job, it's just getting to the front door.
All right, let's put it all together. This whole investigation into the construction myth actually ends up uncovering a way bigger, more fundamental truth about what's really holding people with disabilities back from work. So here's the big takeaway. The problem isn't necessarily an unwilling industry. In this case, the employers were ready to go. The real problem is a society that hasn't built the infrastructure to let all of its citizens fully participate. The barriers are often external. They're on our sidewalks and our bus systems, and they're literally built into the landscape of our cities.
And that leaves us with one last really important question to chew on. This study totally busted one specific myth, but it forces us to ask, what other assumptions are we all making? What other jobs or whole industries have we written off as off-limits based on these kinds of myths instead of on actual data? It's a powerful reminder to question what we think we know about ability, about work, and where the real barriers truly lie.